Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters. To talk about different things around diversity, equity, inclusion, talk about things that people may find challenges with, so we hope you find them really useful. Some are around people's different lived experiences, some really challenging conversation, things that sometimes we don't need to talk about. But we really hope you enjoy the range of topics that we are introducing to you or bringing to you, to your homes, to your house, to your workplaces. We hope you enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Diverse Matters podcast, where we're talking all things inclusivity. Today, we've got a really interesting conversation. We're going to be talking about age inclusion, and we've got two wonderful experts in the space to talk about all the things that we need to. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to dive right in. So Paula, can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Mikayla, of course I can. So I'm Paula Whelan-Cooper. I'm an ED&I consultant with Diverse Matters, delivering training and designing policy and consulting across all aspects of ED&I, something I've been involved with for, over 20 years.
Hey, thanks so much, Paula. And Simon, could you please introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mikayla. Thanks, Paula. And hello, everybody. I'm Simon Long. I rejoice in the absurd title of Growth Director, working for 55 Redefined. We are an age advocacy company that represent the interests of the over 50s, but also help employers attract, engage, recruit, and even retain the over 50s. And we do so through a range of solutions, including job boards, recruitment advertising campaigns, consultancy, and accreditation. And I love my job, and I'm delighted to be talking about age at the tender age of 57.
Thank you, Simon. So, folks, what I think I'd like to start off with is having an understanding from each of you of why age inclusion is important to you, where your journey started in focusing in this area.
Great question, Mikayla. For me, I think age can be overlooked in the workplace when it comes to focusing on equality, diversity, and inclusion. I think often there can be more of a focus on some of the other protected characteristics, and age can be overlooked. But for me, I think it's hugely important because it affects every single person in the workplace and those people looking for work. There's lots of research out there that shows that age discrimination features quite highly amongst the types of discrimination in the workplace. And that crosses all age groups. And I hear lots of examples when I'm delivering training. So that's why, for me, it's a really important area.
And how about you, Simon? Why is it important for you?
Well, I definitely identify with what Paula said. It's important to me, one, because it's an age group that I'm in, over 50, selfishly, so I can really relate to it. Secondly, as Paula said, because all of us age, and of the various protected characteristics, aging seems to be, for some reason, the one ism that hasn't been really tackled at a societal or a workplace level. And on top of that, I'm fascinated just by the tectonic shifts in generations that are going on in population. We're going to be 2 billion over 60s by 2050. So that's a pretty sizable chunk of the population. And in the UK, we're going to have something like 31 million people, I believe it is, aged over 50 by just 2041. So there's a lot going on. And closer to home for me, this time 2 years ago, I found myself out of work. I'd had to close down my business, another victim of COVID. And I applied in vain for over 100 jobs. And the only feedback I ever got was that I was, quote unquote, overqualified, which in my mind is a euphemism for old or a threat. So yes, I lost my mojo, lost weight, lost money, lost my way in life and hit the buffers. And just thought, crikey, is this it at 56, 55? And it knocked the stuffing out of me, to be honest. So I did a LinkedIn post. My now CEO saw it. I was ranting about ageism and, how funny that here I am now employed by that CEO to help others avoid what I experienced.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really interesting, isn't it, what you're both saying in terms of the inevitable, the hopeful, inevitable thing that we're all going to age. Yet it is not. Ageism and the conversation around age isn't prioritized in the case of other characteristics or protected character. In terms of your career, have you seen a shift in people's focus on age. As you show those statistics, and we've been told for countless years we're an aging population. I'm curious, what sort of trends are you seeing that have changed to the time?
Sure. Let's see now. I mean, obviously, I'm seeing a lot now that I'm employed in the space. But prior to that, I was definitely aware that the topic of over 50s was becoming more topical. And indeed, with announcements from the Chancellor about getting off the golf course and people needing to get off their retirement bench and come into work, and there being issues around employment, but also there being more jobs perhaps than there were candidates in the market. There are a whole load of perfect storm scenarios that have transpired to make age and the issue of the over 50s really topical, not least the fact that we're living longer. We're living 30 years longer than we did this time 100 years ago. But we're also living off pensions and pension promises that don't really pass the test because they were built and designed 100 years ago. We're now living 30 years longer. And on top of that, cost of living crisis and all the macroeconomic issues we're facing have created this sort of storm scenario whereby either over 50s have to work, want to work, should work, are being asked to work. And we're all being forced to reevaluate in many ways that three-phased life that we were always brought up to believe in, which was, formative years, then school, work, and retire. And that's all now being rewritten as we age, as we live longer, and as governments have to avoid sleepwalking into a nightmare scenario where they don't have the right health systems in place, the right financial safeguards in place to allow the over 50s to prosper and continue to contribute to society for as long as they are able or willing to do so. My final point would be this term multi-generationality, or whatever, intergenerationality. If I look at this through the lens of the over 50s, I'm particularly interested in that. I think the real measure of age is when it's actually banished and we're living in an ageless society where people of all ages can come together and do of their best and be of their best, irrespective of the number on their clock.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. And how about you, Paula, especially with attitudes in the workplace in terms of the training that you deliver? What trends have you seen change over time?
It's a really interesting question because I think I have seen more recently in training age featuring quite a lot when people talk about examples of times when they're excluded in the workplace. Sometimes it's where young people have gained lots of experience and are managing people who are older than them and aren't taken seriously. It's oftentimes been certainly founded in hospitality, where younger people are not taken seriously by customers. A perception, a bias, whether conscious or unconscious, that you look very young, therefore you can't know a lot. You combine that then with gender, a young female who's a manager, very often experiencing that kind of discrimination from customers. And I guess then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got older employees who feel that perhaps they're being put out to grass, as it were. They often see it. Their time is done. They're seeing, I've heard the expression dinosaurs being used. And I think it's just a real shame that we can't remove that barrier of age and focus on what people can contribute to the workplace, irrespective of what age they are. So definitely, Mikayla, is becoming much more of a conversation in training than I've experienced in the past.
We want the conversation, right? And this is what we're talking about in this podcast series. It's about starting those conversations. It's about following up and being a bit curious, because there's a nervousness when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusivity. People are not sure if they're saying the right thing or the wrong thing, and sometimes the inactivity can be more harmful than some people intend it to. So how in the workplace can we build people's confidence when we're talking about all ages involved?
Well, I think by creating safe environments where we can all talk openly about it without fear of being judged. I think that's really important. And that as part of that, we accept the fact that there are either unconscious bias or discriminatory behaviors that just are part and parcel of the world that we live in. Okay, that's fine. But let's try and find a way of flushing out some of those stereotypes, debunking, if you like, some of those discriminatory views. For example, that when you're over 50 or over the hill, to coin a pun, or that over 50s are more likely to be absent through illness. I mean, the facts show us that in reality, an over 50-year-old is 4 times less likely than someone under 30 to take a day off sick. And then other things such as a view that people are lacking in motivation when you get over 50 or don't want to have career development. I mean, that's all absolute nonsense. But these things have become hardwired in the way in which we've been brought up and been habituated in the way that we think. So I would say awareness sessions, I would say mentoring is a great way of doing it. So we're seeing now a big trend of reverse mentoring, whereby not only do the more experienced older folk give the benefit of their wisdom to younger folk, but vice versa. And younger guys do that to their older counterparts. And that's a brilliant way of leveling the playing field. We know that we can learn a lot from our younger colleagues in things like digital skills, in certain creative sciences and so forth, and some of the entrepreneurial trends that are influencing the way business and education, for example, are evolving. So I would encourage companies to look at that. And I would also think about apprenticeships. Too often apprenticeships are seen as the preserve of the school leavers or university and college leavers. There's no reason why people over 50 can't, from a company's levy for apprenticeships, and learn new skills. They say that an old dog can't learn new tricks. Well, that's not true. So yes, there are various ways, but I think awareness is at the heart of it, and encouraging people to speak out, get rid of the discriminatory perceptions, and then move forward from a common understanding that we're all in this together, irrespective of our age.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Hey, Paula, is there anything that you'd like to add? Maybe even examples that you've seen in the workplace that are doing particularly well in this space?
Yeah, I'd echo everything that Simon has said. I could just probably add, for me, I think I've seen in lots of workplaces where positive banter is allowed to go on, particularly around age. I think it's one area that people think it's okay to make comments. And some people will be okay with conversations like that. For other people, it may well hit a nerve. I guess it depends on where you are in your journey, where your lived experiences are. So I think there'll be times in the workplace we'll all get it wrong. We might unintentionally say something that doesn't land as it was intended. But I think alongside the awareness piece is about creating that culture where people feel safe enough to call out behaviours and challenge without fear of reprisal is hugely important. People need to feel psychologically safe in the workplace, and that's a biggie. I think the other thing for me, employers need to focus on is recruitment and how they word advertisements. So, for example, advertising a job and saying must have 5 years experience in a particular role immediately, indirectly discriminates against younger people maybe leaving school or leaving university who won't have that experience. So we need to take age out of it and focus on skills and abilities, I would say, if we're trying to be truly inclusive when it comes to age, because as we said earlier, it crosses everybody.
Thank you for that. And I like the point that you make there about recruitment. And I know that was when we were speaking before, so we spoke about recruitment practicing and how organizations are and how they can be more proactive in recruiting a wider range of folks. Would you like to share a little bit more about your thoughts on recruitment practices?
Yeah, difficult to follow up on Paula's comments there. They were so spot on. But yes, a lot of clients or employers tend to sort of cookie cut ways of writing job descriptions and adverts. You'd be surprised how few feature people under the age of sort of mid-30s. And how often the language is around things like dynamic and high energy and so forth, which can suggest to people over the age of 50 that is not for them. So thinking about the imagery, looking at the internal job practices and procedures, the hiring processes, training around age bias, recruitment, and recognizing the fact that a large proportion of people in hiring positions are aged between 25 and 35. And inevitably, they don't have the natural empathy with somebody who is aged 55, 65 or 75. So being able to cut through those potential barriers and ensure that everybody is on the same sort of knowledge sheet is really important. And that comes through training, I think. It comes through role play. It can come through all manner of different devices. that enable us all to realise that we must look through an ageless lens, whether it's as a company, whether it's towards our colleagues or indeed our customer, many of whom love seeing a mirror image of themselves, whether you're a 20-year-old or an 80-year-old. So yeah, important stuff.
I think that's really important. I think the point you make around imagery hugely important, because all of the research is showing, particularly amongst younger people, but I guess it would cross all ages, that people tend to, if they're applying for a job, they go to the company website, have a look and see what the website says. So if you open up a website, lots of images of people that are very different to you, particularly in terms of age, gender, race, and so on, you're less likely to apply for that job. So I think it's so important that companies just revisit their website in terms of imagery, but also in terms of that language, because people can be hugely impacted by words like must be highly driven, really energetic workplace. That can make some people who are slightly old perhaps feel that this is not the space for them in the same way as imagery does. And likewise for younger people, they open up a website and what they see is images of, people who are 55 plus and no younger people. Again, that can make them think this is not for me. There's lots of work to be done. And I think for me, when I do training around inclusive recruitment, it isn't just about how you advertise, how you interview and the selection process. It's beyond that, how you induct your staff and how you create a culture that's inclusive, because it's great getting a really diverse range of people in respect of age, but then if they get into the business and all of they're facing is ageist comments throughout their journey, they're not going to stay very long.
It's not just about getting folks in, it's getting folks in and wanting to stay and feeling valued and and thinking, this is the place that I add value, I can have an impact, and want to do that. It's such an important aspect of workplace belonging, and going back to your earlier point around psychological safety. And I guess this is where I hear in terms of what you're saying in terms of training, awareness, and these are the provisions that organizations could do. I'm curious to understand from both of you, are there any practices that you've seen with organizations that do this particularly well that you've come across, that whether it's about the recruitment process, whether it's about the provision that they make to keep people, whatever it may be, just some examples again, because this podcast is an opportunity, as a tool for people. And where can folks go and learn from who else is doing great work in this space? So Simon, I'd like to come to you. What sort of best practice organizations do you know of?
Boots, for example, they recently engaged with us to become an age accredited employer. So that means they basically put their money where their mouth is and said we're serious about recruiting and retaining and reskilling the over 50s. So that meant they signed up to a charter with us and they're going through a 1-year program. And that's a really positive and sort of highly visible commitment on their part, both internally to their colleagues and externally to their investors and their stakeholders. So that's a good example. Sir, just thinking in the financial space, they've been doing a lot of work again with us around how they look at their age diverse strategy going forward, to what extent that links into their performance objectives and the type of skills that they're going to need looking forward as the world evolves, as technology evolves. What type of organizational capabilities are they going to need, and how can they get the best blend of youth and experience in delivering against their growth objectives? And as part of that, their underlying philosophy is that if there's no age strategy, you don't have a growth strategy. And that's something that we subscribe to. Thinking further afield, the likes of, for example, ASDA, who are doing some great work around ex-military, ex-service professionals, so bringing how to help transition people from the armed forces into the commercial sector, and to do so in a way that recognises the skills that ex-military have, but also acknowledges that they need help in transitioning into a new environment, away from the more regimented and highly structured climate that they've been used to. Ernst & Young have done some really interesting work around retirement and how to turn a taboo subject into a proactive, positive discussion that looks at enabling people to make a smooth transition into the second phase of their lives, having honest conversations about what that means, maybe changing job roles from a frontline role to a support and mentoring and tutoring role, to ensure that the institutional knowledge built up over years isn't lost and that those coming through can benefit from that experience. So those are just a few examples.
Thank you for sharing. Plenty of examples there, and yeah, it's good to hear it. And what I enjoy about that is the wide range of sectors that you work with and that are finding value and understanding the need to focus in on this. Paula, I'm curious about any examples that you may have of best practice.
There isn't a company that springs to mind to me that has specifically focused on age. It's interesting in the training arena. It tends to be more generic in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusion training. So it's either awareness training, it might be unconscious bias training, inclusive leadership, and so on. I don't think I've ever been asked to specifically focus on age, which I find quite fascinating. But having said that, it comes up a lot in the training room. And for me, it's more about if you are a company and you're thinking about what training do I need to do, I think those companies who don't see it as a tick box exercise, who really start at the top of the business and train all employees, and then look at a plan to embed that training moving forward, are definitely the ones that it's definitely a real game changer in terms of the conversations in the workplace. Because if we start to free people up to have conversations, they will raise the concerns, particularly around age discrimination in the workplace. But it fascinates me, Mikayla, how many times it comes up in training, but not one company have I worked with that says, actually, there's a real need here for awareness training around age discrimination. It's much more likely to focus maybe on gender, on race, and on disability, which are hugely important. But actually, none of us are one-dimensional. There are lots of parts to us. So our aging workforce potentially may bring with it, for some elements of disability. We all have gender, we all have race and ethnicity. You know, it's interesting how age seems to somehow be powered to one side.
Just echoing how I believe that it is interesting, entirely it's a topic that is talked about but not necessarily focused on, yet it's always mentioned. And maybe it's around that conversation, being braver around it. Maybe there's still some nervousness around it, or maybe there's still the lack of understanding of how important it is to have these conversations.
I was just going to say, sometimes these issues, these topics can only really see the light of day if we talk about hard-nosed return on investment. And what I'm finding is that engaging with senior leaders in business requires that they understand, that they see the business case. And there are some pretty compelling arguments around multi-generationality. For example, we know that a multi-generational workforce is likely to be a more cohesive and harmonious one. We know also that it's likely to be more productive if it better reflects the society that we live and work in. We also know that 56% of employees want to continue working beyond their retirement age. So there's this view that you reach a cliff and you fall off it. Well, that's not true. And on top of that, we know that 90% of, this is from research that we've done at 55 Redefined, we know that 90% of employees aged 55 to 65 believe they've got highly transferable skills. And in fact, 89% of those are prepared to take a pay cut if it means them acquiring new skills and working for a company that is prepared to give them continuous learning and development. And so not only is it the right thing to do, but it makes sound business sense. Anyone who commits to an age-diverse strategy is likely to be able to access the best mix of talent. They're likely to be able to have the most productive working environment from a cultural cohesion point of view. And they're also most likely to reflect their customer base, whether it's a consumer working in a supermarket, walking in a supermarket, or a client that you're trying to pitch to who wants to see that you have a diverse and inclusive workforce. So many different dynamics.
It's really interesting, Simon, your comment about some older people being prepared to take a less of a wage for the right job. And I always think when it comes to age, there's an awful lot of bias, either conscious or unconscious. So for older people who are prepared to take a lower wage, there's often an assumption that they're not going to stick around here because obviously they're just fill-in job until they get something that pays them the money they want. And then with younger people, it's often they haven't stayed very long in any job, so therefore they're not
Yes.
going to stay with us. And actually, for younger people, the research shows that it's very different. When I was growing up, for example, I was led to, you got a job and it was a job for life. And that's the kind of mentality when I was leaving school. Nowadays, young people want to move about. They want to build their skills. They want to gain lots of experience. But it's interesting how, lawyer's perspective, it's often seen as a negative thing. So both ends of the age spectrum, there's quite a lot of bias, both conscious and unconscious.
Yes, there's a lot in terms of perception as well, and almost generalizing a group based on assumptions. And really, when it comes down to it, it's about having those conversations, and it's about conversations like this, breaking it and actually having a look and asking what's actually happening here, what's under the hood. I think that conversation around jobs for life and the portfolio career is the phrase that I've heard the most. It's just very interesting. And again, when it comes down to what's your expectation or what's your value point on that, is it the steady and the consistent and being there for a long time and being able to soak up so much experience and seeing so much within an organization? Or is it about seeing so much within different organizations and being able to apply those skills or that experience to a specific space? If you're not in that 25 to 45 category, if you're on either side of that, there can be a bit of discrimination or the feeling that you won't necessarily be accepted. So I'm curious in terms of your experience or words of advice for those people. What would you say about getting involved and having your say? Or if they're in their workplace and they're feeling that not being treated as fairly, what would you say to those people?
Yes, okay. For me, looking at anybody in employment who is feeling that perhaps there's that unfairness and not being treated fairly because of their age, for me, it's definitely important to speak up, speak out. Do it in a way that's educational, building awareness. I think most times the majority of the times when people say things, make comments that aren't okay, it's often without intent. That doesn't mean that we ignore that because they have huge impact. But I think the onus is on all of us to educate each other. So it's not allowing things to go unchallenged in the workplace. Speak up, speak out. And I like Simon's point earlier about that kind of reverse mentoring, shadowing role, understanding what it is that what people do, what they have to offer, hugely important. And I think in terms of recruitment, if you are somebody who's applying for a job, I think for me, no matter who we are, if we start off in a mindset that maybe I'm too old for this or maybe I'm too young for this, potentially that may show up in how we put ourselves forward. So I think it's about changing your mind and recognizing that actually I'm perfect for this job. I have everything that this company, this organization wants. So I'm going to sell myself.
I like it. The positive mindset. Yes. Simon, how about you?
Well, I'll kick off on the same note as Paula there, and to recognise that if you're in the over 50 category, let's focus on that for a minute, you have inevitably acquired through life's ups and downs extraordinary reserves of things like resilience and lived experience and acquired wisdom. These are priceless skills that an employer is really keen to get their hands on. So don't be shy in coming forward with that in your response to a job ad or in an interview. But also look at your CV and don't be afraid to bring those type of things out in your CV, recognising the old adage that once people have got beyond the first half page of your CV, the lights have gone off. So how do you make that impact? How do you make your statement about who you are rather than necessarily ticking off everything you did when you were 16 and GCSEs and so forth? I also think it's important to do your research, and you'll get a pretty good idea when you look through a company's website, its company reports. It's often if you have a look at their ESG, their sustainability reports, then colleagues often feature in there, and you'll get a real sense of a company's heart and where its values are. So that can be helpful in sort of triaging where you think it's worth spending your time.
And then, Simon, can I just come in on that a second, and can you just explain for context what ESG stands for, please? Point of clarification.
So these are about the sustainability goals. So this is part of the UN's charter, and many organisations are signing up to sustainability goals that look at everything from the planet to climate change to workforce well-being to diversity and inclusion. So a lot of companies are now having to or want to report on this. It's important for their shareholders, stakeholders, public and private perceptions. So it's a big driver. So worth having a look on the website for that. It's generally under sustainability, but also have a look at things like diversity and inclusion. More and more now, EDI is covered on the website. There'll be sections about it. Often it's either standalone or it's in the career section when they do a bit about us, about what it's like to work here. And again, you'll get a good sense of the culture of the company and the type of workforce they're looking to have in place. So that's a good starting point. And then also look at employees. If you go onto LinkedIn and you look at employees, and you'll see what they're posting about, see what the head of diversity and inclusion is posting about, the head of HR, the head of talent acquisition. What are they talking about? What are they bragging about in terms of hires, cultural aspects and so forth? So I think doing your homework is good. Then finally, there are a lot of companies you can go online and search for example, age inclusive employers or age diverse employers. And you'll find a whole list of employers who are known and want to be known for advertising for roles focusing on exactly that, people of a more diverse background. Needless to say, and I would say this, do also have a look at our website, our 55 jobs board, and our work redefined, and you'll see a whole list of employers there who are proactively seeking diverse talent.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's also great for companies to do a bit of benchmarking, see what other companies in their sector are doing around inclusivity and age in the workplace as well. Is also
Yeah, definitely.
a good one.
And you've just made me think, actually, in that sort of benchmarking scenario, another good little tip that I learned when I was looking for jobs is to go and look at diversity and inclusion awards. So who are the ones who are winning the national award against different categories? And you'll get a good sense of who's going out of their way to promote what they're doing in this space. So really what I'm saying is do some homework. Remember that you have got immensely valuable skills that people are looking for. Try to be confident in the knowledge that employers know that you may need a bit of support. You may be coming back from work. You may be a returning parent. You may be a carer who's looking for flexible work. So don't be afraid to ask about what flexible practices and procedures and options are available, and to be honest about your own situation, because you'd be surprised how flexible employers are prepared to be at a time where there is a dearth of talent and they're desperate to access the type of skills that you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both. I think the key things that I'm taking away from what you've spoken about today is that the need for transparency on an organization's sense, having time and being given space to talk things through, to talk it out, to speak up when necessary, and building in confidence in yourself and your ability and what you get, like exactly what Paula was talking about in terms of mindset, mindset of the individual and mindset of the organization. It's not going to be a topic that is just going to find its way just because we have to have intention behind it. Like with all inclusivity measures, right? There has to be intention behind it, and aid is no different to that. Before we sign off, I want to thank you both for your time and ask you both to share with our listeners where they can find out a little bit more about you.
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks for the opportunity to speak, to talk, more to the point, and also to share view with Paula. You can find out about us at 55redefined.co, and you can look at either our Work Redefined website if you're an employer, or you're a potential candidate. You can look at our Jobs Redefined board, where you'll find all the jobs that we advertise. I would also mention, by the way, that if you're looking for career support and guidance, you can also find that in our lifestyle 55 Redefined website, or you might want to look at somebody like Brave Starts. They're a small organization, really good at helping people think about where to head, in what direction to go. The reason we're called 55 Redefined is because research has shown is when we more often than not make critical decisions about a crossroads moment in our lives. So yeah, they're really good at dealing with those crossroads moments and helping you navigate to the next chapter, the next half of your life.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon. And Paula.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mikayla. Really great to have the opportunity to have this conversation, and nice to catch up with Simon and hear lots of his thoughts. It's not an organisation I'd heard of, so it's certainly one I've made a note of and might come in useful for signposting people to
Thank you,
as
Paula.
I move forward. If people want to reach out, I'm contactable paula@diversematters.com, but also I'm on LinkedIn at Paula Whelan, ED&I consultant. So more than happy to have conversations with anybody.
Thank you both so much for your time, and I'll see you next time, listeners.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please do spread the word about our channel and tune in for our next episode.